Manifesto, Poverty, Fixed Minds, and the Machinery of Misguidance. Condemn the desperate if you wish. History rarely listens to the comfortable. Poverty is not merely empty pockets, it is a cage built from fixed mindsets, fear, and advice sold by those who profit from confusion. People cry for solutions: financial literacy, education, faith, relationships, dignity. Yet the world answers with noise, misinformation, disinformation, and hollow sermons about patience while the powerful hoard certainty. Revolutions of thought do not bloom like roses. They claw through doubt, hypocrisy, and systems that normalize hunger while praising competition. Capitalism parades opportunity but breeds alienation. Ideology promises liberation but often breeds obedience. Between these forces stand ordinary people, battered by scarcity and told to blame themselves. History shows the pattern: camps, conflicts, segregation, exploitation, different names, same cruelty. When truth is buried beneath propaganda, even the oppressed repeat the logic of their oppressors. The real enemy is not only poverty but the prison of guidance that teaches people to endure misery instead of dismantling it. So ask yourself, do we seek freedom, or merely a better story to explain our chains?
Nous pourrions être grands, mais nous choisissons plutôt de rester les mêmes.
I want wisdom enough to take care of myself and my family.
Manifesto, Poverty, Fixed Minds, and the Machinery of Misguidance, Part 2. Condemn the questions if you want. Condemn the anger. It changes nothing. History rarely remembers the obedient, it remembers the wounded who refuse to remain silent. Poverty does not only starve the stomach, it starves imagination. It convinces a generation that survival itself is the highest ambition. When a man asks for work, shelter, dignity, or education, he is treated not as a citizen but as a problem to be managed. The world loves slogans about opportunity, yet it distributes suspicion. If a person struggles economically, the system whispers that he must be lazy. If he looks different, speaks differently, or carries the color of a forgotten continent on his skin, the whisper becomes a verdict. The machinery of stereotype grinds quietly but relentlessly. Housing becomes conditional. Employment becomes selective. Health care becomes a privilege disguised as a service. Meanwhile, the same institutions preach discipline, humility, patience. They tell the struggling to study harder, work longer, sacrifice more. They offer advice with the confidence of prophets and the blindness of gamblers. But this guidance is often hollow. It demands resilience without confronting the architecture that produces despair. Revolution, in the deepest sense, is not a parade of flags or slogans. It is the slow demolition of illusions. It is recognizing that systems which glorify competition will inevitably manufacture losers. It is recognizing that capitalism sells aspiration while quietly manufacturing scarcity. The world insists that destiny belongs to the disciplined few, yet millions wake every morning already condemned by circumstance. And still people ask, what must I do? Should I chase education? Should I chase ownership? Should I chase employment in a system that already decided my worth before I entered the room? These are not questions of ambition, they are questions of survival. A proud man asking for a place to stand should not feel like a criminal. Yet the culture of fixed minds ensures that anyone outside the dominant narrative must justify their existence. A person does not merely fight poverty, they fight perception. They fight the assumption that they are inferior, suspicious, temporary. But beneath the noise lies a harsher truth. Poverty persists not because solutions are unknown, but because the suffering of the many fuels the comfort of the few. The system requires desperation. It requires competition among the desperate so that rebellion never becomes cooperation. Thus the manifesto stands not as a promise of victory but as an indictment of illusion. The question is no longer whether change is possible. The question is whether people are willing to abandon the myths that keep them obedient.
Nous pourrions être grands, mais nous choisissons plutôt de rester les mêmes.
I want wisdom enough to take care of myself and my family.
Manifesto, Poverty, Fixed Minds, and the Machinery of Misguidance, Part 3. Condemn the accusation if you must. Condemn the language, condemn the bitterness, condemn the refusal to smile politely while the machinery of poverty grinds entire generations into dust. It makes little difference. History has never been written by the comfortable observer. It is written in the exhaustion of those who discover that the promises handed to them were never meant to be fulfilled. The world repeats a tired script: work harder, stay disciplined, remain patient. These phrases are delivered like sacred commandments. But the brutal truth hiding behind them is that discipline alone does not dismantle structures designed to keep people circling the same narrow corridors of survival. Poverty is not merely a lack of money, it is a psychological climate. It is a system of expectations that quietly trains the mind to accept limitation as destiny. Fixed mindsets flourish in this climate. The poor are taught that their struggle is the result of personal failure. The desperate are instructed to admire the very structures that keep them desperate. Advice pours endlessly from institutions, influencers, commentators, and self-appointed mentors. Most of it is not guidance at all. It is sedation. It tells people to adjust their attitude rather than confront the architecture of inequality that surrounds them. The tragedy deepens when isolation becomes the norm. The absence of strong social support networks leaves people exposed, psychologically, economically, and morally. A person cut off from community will search for belonging wherever it appears, even in places poisoned by resentment, hostility, and exploitation. In those spaces, empathy decays quickly. Compassion becomes a weakness. Suspicion becomes a survival skill. This is how the erosion of solidarity occurs. Poverty fragments communities that once relied on mutual trust. Historical grievances are revived, exaggerated, weaponized. Contemporary conflicts are repackaged as identity battles. People who should be allies become enemies. They dehumanize one another, convinced that someone else's failure will somehow secure their own survival. Meanwhile, the architects of the system remain untouched. They watch as divided communities exhaust themselves fighting over scraps. They understand something that the struggling often forget: a fragmented population rarely organizes itself into meaningful resistance. Revolution, in its deepest sense, is not merely a seizure of power. It is the rejection of intellectual paralysis. It is the refusal to inherit the mental cages built by earlier generations. But revolutions rarely succeed when people have been trained to mistrust one another. A population that cannot rebuild empathy cannot rebuild anything else. And yet the cycle persists. The hungry are told to study motivation. The isolated are told to network harder. The vulnerable are told to toughen up. These instructions sound reasonable until one notices that they never address the conditions that created the crisis in the first place. The result is a culture of misguided advice. Entire industries now exist to transform despair into motivational slogans. Books, seminars, and lectures promise transformation while carefully avoiding the deeper question: why must so many people fight so violently simply to exist with dignity? This manifesto does not promise salvation. It offers something harsher: recognition. Recognition that poverty is not an accident but a pattern. Recognition that fixed mindsets are cultivated because they stabilize unjust systems. Recognition that communities stripped of empathy cannot repair themselves. The real revolution may not arrive with banners or rifles. It may arrive quietly, when enough people refuse to inherit the psychological limits imposed upon them, and begin, however painfully, to rebuild solidarity where fragmentation once ruled.
Nous pourrions être grands, mais nous choisissons plutôt de rester les mêmes.
I want wisdom enough to take care of myself and my family.
Manifesto: Poverty, Fixed Minds, and the Machinery of Misguidance, Part 4. Condemn the voice that refuses to decorate misery with polite language. Condemn the accusation that the world is not simply flawed, but arranged in a manner that benefits the few while exhausting the many. History may absolve revolutions, but it rarely absolves the societies that forced them into existence. Poverty continues to stalk the modern world like an inherited disease. It is discussed endlessly by economists, debated by politicians, and analyzed by experts who speak in careful language that avoids the brutality of the reality itself. Poverty is not only an economic condition, it is a culture of restricted imagination. It persuades the poor that their suffering is the result of poor choices, insufficient discipline, or weak character. The system survives by convincing the victims that the architecture of their suffering is natural. The fixed mindset thrives in this environment. Children raised in scarcity learn to calculate risk differently. They learn caution where others learn confidence. They are told repeatedly that success belongs to those who dream boldly, yet every structural barrier quietly instructs them to remain realistic. Misguided advice flows from every direction. Work harder, stay humble, invest wisely, build character. These phrases carry the tone of wisdom but rarely the substance of justice. Meanwhile, the cultural machinery continues its work. Cultural norms sculpt the moral imagination of entire societies. Some cultures celebrate accumulation, competition, and personal triumph as the ultimate markers of achievement. Others attempt to anchor their identity in cooperation, shared dignity, and mutual care. Yet, even those traditions are increasingly eroded by a global culture of consumption that measures worth through ownership rather than character. Consumerism has become a quiet ideology. It persuades individuals that fulfillment lies in acquisition. It promises that a better phone, a larger house, or a more prestigious career will soothe the anxieties produced by the very system that created them. Underneath this spectacle lies a deeper question that few institutions dare to confront. Does a society obsessed with competition truly care about the health and well-being of its people? The answer appears in the statistics that circulate through academic journals and policy reports. Hundreds of millions remain hungry, while markets celebrate growth. Entire regions continue to experience economic stagnation, while corporations announce record profits. Prosperity at the national level may improve infrastructure and technological capacity, yet it does not automatically produce meaning, stability, or emotional security. This contradiction breeds confusion. Individuals are told that they possess unlimited potential while simultaneously navigating systems designed to concentrate opportunity within narrow circles. They are advised to cultivate curiosity and self-interest as engines of progress, yet these same qualities are condemned when they challenge established hierarchies. In such a climate, morality becomes negotiable. Ethical discourse shifts according to economic incentives. Empathy becomes conditional. The language of solidarity is replaced by the language of competition. Even compassion is commodified, packaged into campaigns and slogans that reassure consumers they are participating in change while leaving the underlying structures untouched. Revolutionary language once promised to disrupt this pattern. It insisted that history could be redirected by those who refused to accept the inevitability of inequality. Yet revolutions themselves often encounter the same dilemma: the human tendency to replicate the hierarchies they once condemned. This manifesto therefore refuses to offer comfort. It offers recognition instead. Recognition that poverty persists not merely because resources are scarce, but because imagination has been disciplined into obedience. Recognition that cultural norms can be powerful engines of both solidarity and domination. Recognition that misguided advice is one of the most efficient tools of social control ever invented. A population trained to believe that success is purely individual will rarely question the structure that distributes opportunity unevenly. A society taught to worship consumption will struggle to remember the value of community. And a world that praises curiosity while punishing dissent will continue to produce citizens who suspect that truth is something to be managed rather than discovered. History may absolve the revolutionaries, but it will also judge the societies that normalize the quiet violence of poverty.
Nous pourrions être grands, mais nous choisissons plutôt de rester les mêmes.
I want wisdom enough to take care of myself and my family.
Manifesto: Poverty, Fixed Minds, and the Machinery of Misguidance. Part 5. Condemn the words if they sting. Condemn the voice if it refuses to whisper politely about hunger, addiction, and the quiet violence of survival. It changes nothing. The machinery that produces poverty has never been delicate. It grinds relentlessly while pretending to offer opportunity. History has a habit of pretending that suffering is accidental, when in truth it is often engineered, sustained, and conveniently misunderstood. Revolutionary language once promised to dismantle these structures. It spoke of dignity, of liberation, of the moment when the powerless would finally confront the systems that fed on their exhaustion. Yet the reality that followed revealed a more complicated truth. Poverty does not disappear simply because a banner is raised or a speech is delivered. It survives in the stubborn persistence of fixed mindsets and misguided guidance that teaches people to endure exploitation rather than dismantle it. The poor are given advice the way prisoners are given instructions on how to behave quietly in their cells. Study harder. Work longer. Be grateful. These instructions are repeated so often that they begin to sound like wisdom. But wisdom rarely demands obedience without questioning the structure that demands the obedience in the first place. Into this environment of exhaustion enters another quiet epidemic: drug abuse. The world prefers to frame addiction as a personal failure, a weakness of will or character. It is easier to blame the individual than to examine the environment that cultivates despair. Yet addiction is rarely born in isolation. It grows where opportunity shrinks, where community collapses, and where individuals feel increasingly detached from any sense of identity or purpose. In these spaces, intoxication becomes a substitute for belonging. It dulls the anxiety produced by economic instability. It silences the voice that asks uncomfortable questions about inequality, injustice, and abandonment. Some call it free will, others call it indoctrination. The truth is uglier. It is both. Individuals make choices, but those choices unfold within environments carefully shaped by neglect, misinformation, and systemic disregard. The tragedy is not only personal. Addiction ripples outward through families and communities, eroding the fragile bonds that once offered protection. The same society that lectures the addicted about responsibility often withdraws the very support structures that might have prevented the collapse. Social networks weaken, trust disappears, and entire neighborhoods begin to resemble laboratories of despair. Meanwhile, the marketplace continues its performance. It sells distraction, chemical relief, motivational speeches, and hollow promises of transformation. Poverty becomes profitable. Addiction becomes profitable. The suffering of the vulnerable becomes another commodity circulating through industries that quietly depend on the continuation of the crisis. This is where the fixed mindset performs its final act of obedience. It persuades individuals that their struggle is purely personal. It encourages them to view failure as proof of their own inadequacy rather than evidence of structural imbalance. Misguided advice thrives here, delivered with confidence by those who rarely confront the brutal mathematics of survival. The manifesto does not pretend that destiny can be rewritten by slogans alone. It recognizes something harsher, that people often inherit systems that were never designed for their flourishing. Some will attempt revolution. Others will attempt escape through intoxication or withdrawal. Many will simply endure, carrying the weight of expectations that were never realistic to begin with. But one demand remains. If a person refuses to cultivate identity, responsibility, and awareness within this environment, They become another silent component in the machinery that sustains it. Poverty feeds on silence. Addiction feeds on isolation. Misguided advice feeds on obedience. The choice, however uncomfortable, remains the same. Remain a spectator in the theater of suffering, or recognize the structure that built the stage in the first place.